For 18 long years, I lived as a pariah, an outcast from my own daughter's heart. Can you imagine it? For nearly 2 decades, I sent hundreds of letters, thousands of dollars for tuition, and every ounce of my love into a void, receiving nothing back but a chilling, stony silence. Today is my daughter Sophie's wedding day, but instead of wearing a proud suit to walk her down the aisle, I am standing at the service entrance, lurking in the shadows like a common thief. Sophie sent me a final, bitter ultimatum. Don't show up. Your presence will ruin the only happiness I have. I was ready to set this walnut box down and vanish from her life forever, believing that my absence was the only gift I had left to give. But just as I turned to leave, an old trunk from her childhood, meant to be a simple decoration, gave way at the bottom. Hundreds of envelopes spilled across the floor. My handwriting, my stamps, my heart, and every single one of them was still sealed, never once opened by the girl they were meant for. A cold, numbing realization washed over me. My daughter didn't reject me. We were both trapped in a vile, calculated web of lies spun by the one person she trusted most, her mother. This truth could incinerate this wedding. It could turn Sophie's happiest day into a battlefield of betrayal. Should I walk away and let the lie live on, or should I walk into that hall and reclaim the 18 years that were stolen from us? The smell of sawdust has a way of settling the mind, even when the heart is in a state of quiet collapse. For 30 years, I have made my living with wood, oak, cedar, walnut, materials that are honest. If you treat them with respect, they hold their shape. If you make a mistake, the wood bears the scar for all to see. There is no room for lies in a workshop. I wish I could say the same for my life. I am 59 years old now, and as I look at the gnarled skin of my hands, I realize that 18 of those years have been spent in a silence that was not of my choosing, yet one I allowed to solidify like cold glue. The end of my marriage to Claire didn't happen with a single dramatic blow. It was a slow rot. There were the long months I spent away at construction sites to keep us afloat, the mounting debts, and the shouting matches that eventually became more frequent than the quiet moments. When the judge finally handed down the papers 18 years ago, Claire walked away with our 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, and a heart full of resentment. I walked away with my tools and a hollow ache in my chest that has never quite left. In those first few months I showed up at the house. I called. I wanted to be the father I knew I was. But Claire had a plan that was far more sophisticated than mere spite. She didn't just tell me to leave. She made me believe that my very presence was a poison to my daughter. I remember the first message. It was late on a Tuesday, 3 months after the divorce. My old phone vibrated on the workbench, and the text read, "Dad, please don't come tomorrow. I can't sleep when I know you're coming. I get scared." I sat there for an hour, the words burning into my eyes. She was 10. How could my little girl, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder while I read her stories about forest animals, be scared of me? Then came the others. Month after month, Claire would send me updates or forward messages from Sophie. They were harrowing. She told me Sophie was having panic attacks at the mention of my name. She told me the girl was seeing a counselor because of the trauma of my abandonment. Claire would send messages written in Sophie's name. "I don't want to see you. You chose your job over us. Just leave me alone." I was a man who worked with his hands, not a psychologist. I didn't know how to fight a shadow. I believed those messages were real because the alternative, that a mother would use her child's voice as a weapon, was unthinkable. I was terrified that by forcing my way into her life, I would break her completely. So I did the hardest thing a father can do. I retreated. I chose a silence that I thought was a form of protection. But I never stopped being her father, not for a single day. Since I couldn't speak to her, I wrote to her. Since I couldn't see her, I sent her pieces of myself. Every month, I wrote a letter. I told her about the things I was building, about the birds that nested outside my shop, and about how much I loved her. I sent birthday cards with pressed flowers. I sent gifts, a small wooden horse I carved, a locket I'd found in an antique shop, old photographs of us at the lake, so she wouldn't forget we were once happy. And then there was the money. Claire was struggling. I knew she was. I didn't want Sophie to feel the bite of poverty like I had. I set up an arrangement with Claire, transferring a significant portion of my earnings into a private account she managed. It was for Sophie's school, her dance lessons, her future. She doesn't need to know it's from me. I told Claire during one of our brief, icy phone calls. Just tell her she's taken care of. I thought I was being noble. I thought I was being the selfless martyr. In reality, I was handing Claire the ink to rewrite my daughter's history. Years bled into a decade, then more. I watched from the periphery a man looking through a frosted window. I saw photos of her graduation on social media, Sophie in a blue gown, smiling brightly. Beside her was a man named Owen. Owen was the replacement. Claire had married him a few years after we split. By all accounts, he was a decent man, patient, kind, and steady. He was the one who taught her to drive, the one who cheered at her recitals, and the one who comforted her when her heart was broken. And the cruelest part was that Sophie grew up believing that the life she enjoyed was entirely thanks to Owen and Claire. She was told, and she believed, that I had vanished into the wind, taking my money and my love with me. When she looked at her tuition bills being paid, she thought it was Owen's hard work. When she sat in a warm house, she thought it was Owen's protection. Owen, for his part, contributed what he could, but he was never told that the bulk of the savings Claire used came from the man in the woodshop 3 towns over. He lived in a house built on my silence, and he didn't even know it. I stayed in my workshop, the scent of cedar my only constant companion. Every time I reached for the phone to call her, I remembered those fake messages about her panic and her fear. I convinced myself that my absence was the greatest gift I could give her. I didn't realize that I wasn't giving her a gift. I was giving her a void. I became a master of the letters she never received. I had a trunk in the corner of my shop where I kept copies of everything I sent. The receipts, the cards, the long-winded letters, where I tried to explain why I wasn't there. It was my own private record of a fatherhood that existed only on paper. Sometimes the weight of the lie felt like it would crush me. I would see a father and daughter in the grocery store, and I'd have to leave my cart and walk out into the cold air just to breathe. I blamed Claire, yes. But as the years passed, the blame started to shift. I realized I was a coward. I had been so afraid of being rejected by her that I accepted a proxy rejection from her mother without ever looking my daughter in the eye and asking for the truth. Now, Sophie is 28. She is a woman I don't know, about to marry a man I've never met. A week ago, I received a final message. This one wasn't a fake from Claire. It was a cold, clear email from Sophie herself. She told me she was marrying a man named Noah. She told me that Owen would be walking her down the aisle. And then she asked me. No, she ordered me not to come. You weren't there for the moments that mattered. The email read, "Don't try to be there for this one. I don't want the past ruining my future." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and it was based on a mountain of lies. I spent the night in my shop, the lights humming above me. I looked at the wood I had selected, a beautiful dark walnut. I began to cut. I began to sand. If I couldn't be the father she wanted, I would at least be the craftsman she deserved. I would build her a box, not a coffin for our relationship, but a vessel. Inside that box, I would put 18 years of evidence. The shoes she wore when she was 10, the recordings of my voice wishing her a happy birthday every year, voices that grew older and more tired as the years went by, and the letters, the hundreds of letters that I had sent into a black hole. I knew that by giving her this box, I was risking everything. I was risking her wedding, her relationship with her mother, and her peace of mind. But as I ran my hand over the smooth grain of the walnut, I knew that the facade of her happiness had reached its limit. The silence was no longer a protection, it was a prison, and it was time for both of us to step outside. The morning of the wedding was crisp, the kind of day that felt like a fresh start for everyone but me. I sat in my truck outside the venue, a renovated barn tucked away in the countryside, watching the sleek cars of the guests roll past. I was wearing my best suit, one I hadn't donned in years, but I wasn't there to take my seat. I was there because of an email that felt like a final eviction notice from my daughter's life. I looked at the walnut box sitting on the passenger seat. I had spent 72 hours straight in the shop, finishing it. The grain was perfect, dark, rich, and honest. Inside were the fragments of a fatherhood lived in the margins. A tiny pair of ballet shoes, drawings of a family that no longer existed, and a voice recorder where I had whispered "Happy Birthday" to a girl who never heard me. I didn't use the main entrance. I didn't want to be the man who caused a scene, the absent father lurking in the shadows of a celebration. I drove around to the service entrance, where caterers were hauling crates of champagne and florists were trimming the stems of white roses. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of woodworking, gripped the box tightly as I stepped into the cool, dim hallway of the storage area. I was looking for a coordinator, someone I could leave the box with before I disappeared back to my workshop. But as I rounded a corner into a staging room filled with rented chairs and decor, my heart stopped. There, sitting on a velvet-covered table, was an old steamer trunk. It was meant to be part of a memory corner, decorated with lace and old photographs of Sophie. My breath hitched. I knew that trunk. I had bought it at a flea market for $20 when Sophie was 6. I had sanded it down and repainted the iron straps myself. It was where she used to keep her treasures, seashells, smooth stones, and comic books. Seeing it here, at her wedding, felt like a cruel joke. Claire had kept it. She had used it to curate a history of Sophie's life, a history that, from the looks of the photos pinned to the board above it, didn't include me. I moved closer, drawn by a strange, magnetic pull. I reached out to touch the familiar curve of the wood. That was when I noticed something off. The interior lining, a faded floral fabric I remembered Sophie spilling juice on years ago, wasn't sitting flush against the bottom. There was a tiny, jagged sliver of blue paper poking out from beneath the fabric in the far corner. I'm a man who notices how things are joined together. I know when a seam is forced, and when a hidden compartment is built. I slid my fingers along the edge, feeling for a release. With a dull thud, the false bottom shifted. I pulled it back. My own handwriting stared back at me. Hundreds of envelopes, stacked in neat, suffocating rows. Some were yellowed with age, others were crisp and white. Birthday cards with the glitter still sparkling on the envelopes. Envelopes containing the checks for her tuition. Checks I had sent to Claire, believing they were being cashed and credited to our support for Sophie. None of them had been opened, not a single one. The world tilted. The air in the room grew thin and cold. 18 years of my life were sitting in the bottom of a decorative trunk, hidden beneath a layer of lace and lies. Sophie hadn't rejected me. She hadn't even known I was there. Daniel. The voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. I turned. Claire was standing in the doorway. She looked elegant in a champagne-colored dress, her hair pinned back perfectly. But when her eyes fell on the open compartment and the letters in my hand, the color drained from her face faster than I thought possible. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You weren't supposed to come." "I was leaving a gift," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. I held up a bundle of letters, tied with a rubber band. "I found these, Claire. Why are they here?" Why are they still here? She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, her movements frantic. Put them back, Daniel. Please, today is Sophie's day. You can't do this now. I can't do this. I felt a surge of heat in my chest, a roar of 18 years of suppressed grief. I spent nearly 2 decades thinking my daughter hated me. I spent nights wondering what I did that was so unforgivable that she wouldn't even send a postcard back. And all this time, you had them? You kept the money? You let her believe Owen was the one providing for her? Claire slumped into a chair, her composure finally shattering. She didn't look like the victor. She looked small, haunted. I was scared, she choked out. In the beginning, after the divorce, it was so hard. Sophie would cry for you every night. She wanted to move in with you. I felt like I was losing her, Daniel. I had lost everything else. The house, my stability, my sense of who I was. I couldn't lose her too. So you lied to her? I asked. You told her I chose work over her? You sent me those messages, pretending to be her, telling me she was having panic attacks because of me. I hid the first one because I was overwhelmed, she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. Then the second one because I was ashamed. By the time the 10th letter came, I was trapped. How do you tell your daughter that the father she's been grieving for years has actually been writing to her every week? I was a coward, Daniel. I am a coward. I looked at the letters. I could have walked out that door right then. I could have marched into the bridal suite, dumped this mountain of truth on Sophie's lap, and watched Claire's world burn. I deserved that. I deserved my name back. I deserved for Sophie to know that I never, not for 1 second, stopped being her father. But then I thought about Sophie. I thought about her in her white dress, finally feeling like she had a stable, happy life. If I gave her this truth now, in this moment, it wouldn't be a gift. It would be a grenade. It would destroy her relationship with her mother on the very day she needed her most. I looked at Claire. She was watching me, waiting for the blow. I'm not going to ruin her wedding, I said, the words feeling like lead in my mouth. She let out a sob of relief, but I held up my hand to stop her. I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it because unlike you, I actually care about what happens to her heart. But this ends today, Claire. All of it. I took the walnut box I had built and placed it on the table next to the trunk. I took a piece of hotel stationery from a nearby desk and wrote a single note. Sophie, you asked me not to be here today, and I will respect that. I am leaving this box for you. It contains 18 years of a truth that was kept from us both. Today belongs to you and Noah. The truth has waited 18 years. It can wait one more day. Open this when you are ready to see who I really am. I tucked the note into the top of the box. I didn't put the letters back in the secret compartment. I left them in the walnut box where they belonged. I'm leaving, I told Claire. I didn't look at her. Tell Owen I'm sorry I won't be there to see her walk down the aisle. He's been the father I wasn't allowed to be, and for that, I suppose I should thank him, even if the foundation he stood on was a lie. I walked out of the staging room and back through the service entrance. The sun was higher now, the air warmer. As I walked to my truck, I heard the faint sound of a string quartet beginning to play. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking. I had spent 18 years in a prison built by someone else's fear, and for the first time, I had the key in my hand. I wasn't at the altar. I wasn't the one walking her down the aisle. But as I started the engine and drove away from the barn, I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. The silence was finally ending. I had left the door open. Now, all I could do was wait and see if Sophie would choose to walk through it. The white silk of my dress felt like a shroud. Everyone kept telling me I looked like a princess, that this was the happiest day of my life. But all I felt was a cold, buzzing numbness. I stood in the small staging room behind the main hall, staring at the old steamer trunk that my mother had insisted on bringing. It was supposed to be a memory corner, a curated collection of a life that I was starting to realize I didn't fully understand. I saw my mother, Claire, standing near the trunk. Her face was a mask of pale, frantic energy. She was clutching a small, dark walnut box, the one I had seen the man I called my biological father carrying earlier. She looked like she was trying to shove it into a trash bin or hide it behind a stack of rented chairs. "Mom, what are you doing?" My voice sounded thin, even to my own ears. She jumped, nearly dropping the box. "Nothing, honey. Just clearing some clutter. You should be in the bridal suite. Noah is looking for you." "That's the box from Daniel, isn't it?" I stepped closer. "It's nothing but a distraction," she said, her voice rising in a way that signaled a looming breakdown. "He's trying to ruin this for you. He's always been selfish, Sophie. Please, let me just put this away. We can look at it after the honeymoon." She turned to walk away, her movements jerky and desperate. But she didn't get far. A hand reached out and firmly gripped her arm. It was Owen. My stepdad, the man who had actually raised me, looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it was a deep, bone-weary disappointment. "Claire, stop," Owen said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a stone. "Owen, not now," my mother hissed. "The guests are taking their seats. We have 20 minutes. "I saw him, Claire," Owen said, ignoring her plea. "I saw Daniel in the hallway, and I saw the look on his face when he left this room. He didn't look like a man trying to cause a scene. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a truck." He gently took the walnut box from her shaking hands. Claire tried to grab it back, a small, desperate sound escaping her throat, but Owen stepped between her and me. "You've spent 18 years protecting her from a truth you decided she couldn't handle," Owen said to my mother, his eyes never leaving hers. "But look at her. She's a grown woman. You can't steal her choice again. Not today." He turned to me and handed me the box. "He left a note on top, Sophie. I think you need to read it." I took the box. It was heavy, the wood smooth and warm, smelling of linseed oil and cedar. I read the note. Daniel's handwriting was jagged, as if his hand had been shaking when he wrote it. "The truth has waited 18 years. It can wait one more day." But I couldn't wait. The lie was already in the room, thick and suffocating, like smoke. I sat down on a folding chair and opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a small silver digital recorder. I pressed the play button. "Hi, Sophie. It's Dad. It's June 12th. You're 11 today. I hope you liked the bike. I sent it to the house, but your mum said you were too busy with friends to talk. I just wanted to say I love you. Happy birthday, Peanut." The voice was young, full of a nervous, aching hope. I pressed the next button. "Happy 14th, Soph. I'm sorry I couldn't be at the recital. I know things are complicated. I'm still writing. I'll keep writing until you're ready." The voice grew older. It grew tired. By the time I reached the last recording, the voice was the one I had heard in the email, low, gravelly, and resigned, but the ending was always the same. "I love you. I'm still here." A physical weight settled on my chest. This was the first layer of the truth. He hadn't walked away. He hadn't chosen work over me. He had been a constant, invisible presence, a man shouting into a void that my mother had created. I looked up at my mother. She was leaning against the wall, her hands covering her face, sobbing silently. Owen stood by the window, his back to us, looking out at the guests. I reached back into the box and pulled out a stack of letters. Then I remembered the trunk. I walked over to it, my white dress rustling against the floorboards. I saw the false bottom that Daniel must have uncovered. I pulled it back. Hundreds of them. A sea of blue and white envelopes, all addressed to me in that same jagged script. None of them had been opened. Not one birthday card, not one just checking in note. 18 years of his thoughts, his apologies, his life, all tucked away in the dark while I grew up believing I was a burden he didn't want to carry. This was the second layer, the sheer volume of his effort. It wasn't just a few attempts, it was a life's work of trying to reach me. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped one of the envelopes. As I reached down to pick it up, a slip of paper fell out from a separate folder in the bottom of the trunk. It was a bank receipt, then another, and another. They were transfers, monthly payments, for years, going into an account I recognized. The one my mother told me was our safety net. There were receipts for my college tuition, my car insurance, even the deposit for this very wedding venue. I looked at Owen. You told me you paid for my junior year abroad. You said you worked overtime for 6 months to make that happen. Owen turned around. He looked confused. I did work overtime, Sophie. Your mother said we were short. I didn't know there was another account. I looked at the receipts again. They were signed by Daniel Reeves. He hadn't just sent letters. He had been the silent engine behind my entire life. While I was resenting him for his abandonment, he was the one ensuring I never went without. This was the final layer, the one that broke me. The lie wasn't just about feelings, it was a financial fraud of the heart. My mother had taken his money to build a life where he didn't exist. How could you? The word was a whisper, but it felt like a scream. I was afraid, my mother cried out, finally dropping her hands. You were all I had, Sophie. When he left, I thought if you knew how much he loved you, you'd leave me too. I was drowning, and Owen was the only one who stayed. I just wanted us to be a normal family. We weren't a family, I said, standing up. We were a script you wrote. The door opened, and Noah stepped in. He saw the mess of letters, my tear-streaked face, and the shattered look on my parents' faces. He didn't ask about the guests. He didn't mention the schedule. He walked straight to me and took my hands. Sophie, what's happening? I couldn't even explain it. I just pointed to the box and the letters. He picked up one of the receipts, then the note Daniel had left. He looked at my mother, then at Owen, and he seemed to understand the gravity of the wreckage in the room. The coordinator is about to start the procession, Noah said softly. He looked me in the eye, his grip firm and grounding. But listen to me, this isn't about them right now. This is about you. He stepped closer, blocking out the sight of my mother. If you need to stop this, we stop it. Right now, we can tell the guests there's been an emergency. We can go find him. We can take all the time you need to breathe. I don't care about the money or the face of it. I'm here for you, not the party. For the first time that day, I felt like I could actually draw a breath. Noah was offering me the one thing I had never truly had, the power to choose. My mother had controlled my past, and Daniel had been forced into the role of a silent observer. But Noah was giving me the present. I looked at the walnut box. I thought about the man in the parking lot, the one who had waited 18 years for a day that might never come. I thought about the cowardice that had kept us apart and the quiet, stubborn love that had kept him writing anyway. The memory corner was a lie. The woman in the white dress felt like a stranger, but the letters, those were real. I don't want to stop, I said, my voice finally steady. But I'm not walking out there the way we planned. Everything has changed, Noah. Then we change with it, he said. I looked at Owen. He looked heartbroken, but he nodded. He knew his role had been built on a foundation that had just washed away. I looked at my mother, who was a ghost of the person I thought I knew. I reached down and picked up the recorder. I put it in the hidden pocket of my dress. Then I picked up a single, unopened letter from the very top of the stack, the one Daniel had left today. I need to find him, I said, before the music starts. I need to see him. Noah nodded and opened the door for me. I didn't look back at the trunk or the lace. I ran. I ran through the service hallway, the silk of my dress catching on the rough wooden floor, heading toward the parking lot where a man was waiting in the silence. He had finally decided to break. The gravel of the parking lot was unforgiving under my satin shoes, and the heavy silk of my wedding dress felt like a leaden weight as I ran. I didn't care about the hem gathering dust or the way my breath hitched in the cold afternoon air. I only cared about the silver truck idling near the exit. "Daniel, wait!" my voice cracked, sounding small against the vastness of the countryside. The truck stopped. The brake lights glowed like two angry red eyes in the shade of the trees. The door creaked open, and the man I had spent 18 years mourning while he was still alive stepped out. He looked older than he had in the staging room. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes weary, as if the weight of the box he'd left behind had transferred entirely onto his soul. I stopped a few feet away from him, my chest heaving. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the dry grass and the distant, muffled tune of a string quartet preparing for a ceremony that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. "You're supposed to be inside, Sophie," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You have a life to start." "A life built on what?" I snapped, the bitterness finally breaking through. I held up the bundle of letters I was still clutching. "Why didn't you find me? If you were sending these, if you were paying for my school, if you were right there, why did you let me believe you had vanished? Why didn't you just walk up to the front door and demand to see me?" Daniel looked down at his boots, then back at me. There was a raw, naked pain in his expression that made my anger falter. "I came, Sophie. I came to the house a dozen times that first year. I went to your school. I sat in my truck outside your dance recitals just to see you walk inside. Then, why didn't you say anything?" "Because your mother told me you were terrified of me," he whispered. "She sent me messages. She told me you were having panic attacks at the mention of my name. She said that seeing me would undo months of therapy. She even showed me texts written in your name begging me to stay away because my abandonment had broken you so badly that my presence was a trigger. I felt the blood drain from my face. I never wrote those. I never had therapy for that. I was just waiting for a phone call that never came." "I know that now," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "But back then, I believed the words others said for you. I was a man who didn't want to be the villain in his daughter's story. I thought if I stayed away, if I just provided for you from the shadows, I was giving you the peace you needed to grow up happy. I was a coward, Sophie. I stayed behind these letters because I was too afraid to find out if the lies were true. I chose the safety of the silence over the risk of being hated. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were both victims of my mother's fear, yes, but we were also victims of our own passivity. He had retreated into his workshop, and I had retreated into the comfortable narrative of the abandoned child. Neither of us had fought hard enough to break the seal on the truth. "We both failed," I said softly, the anger replaced by a profound hollow sadness. Daniel nodded slowly. "We did, and I'll have to live with that every day for the rest of my life. But you don't have to. Go back inside. Noah is a good man. Don't let my mistakes or your mother's ruin your day." "I'm not letting anyone else decide what ruins my day," I said, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "You aren't leaving. Not like this. Sophie, I can't walk you down that aisle. It would be an insult to Owen, and it would be a lie to everyone in that room." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to." I turned and began walking back toward the barn, not looking back to see if he was following. I knew he would. The silence had been broken. There was no going back to the way things were. Inside the staging room, the air was thick with tension. Noah was waiting by the door, his face a picture of relief when he saw me. Owen was standing near the window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking like a man who had discovered the foundation of his house was made of sand. My mother was nowhere to be seen. I found out later she had retreated to a back room, unable to face the wreckage of the day. I walked up to Owen. He looked at me with an apology in his eyes that he didn't even know how to voice. "I didn't know, Sophie," he said, his voice shaking. "About the letters, about the money. I thought I was the one." "You were the one who stayed, Owen," I said, reaching out to touch his arm. "That counts for everything, but the story I was told was a lie, and I can't pretend it wasn't." I turned to Noah. He took my hand, his grip steadying the trembling in mine. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "The guests are waiting. The music has started." "I want to finish this," I said, "but on my terms." I gave clear instructions to the coordinator. I saw the flash of confusion on her face, but she didn't argue. She saw the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who was finally taking the pen back into her own hands. The doors to the ceremony hall swung open. The string quartet transitioned into the wedding march. The hundreds of guests stood up, a sea of expectant faces, waiting for the traditional image of a father leading his daughter to her new life. But I didn't appear with a man on my arm. I stepped onto the runner alone. A soft murmur rippled through the pews, a wave of surprise and hushed questions. I didn't look at the guests. I didn't look at the flowers or the lights. I looked straight ahead at Noah, who was standing at the altar with a small, proud smile on his face. But as I walked, I felt the presence of the two men who had shaped my life. Following my instructions, Daniel and Owen were already seated. They weren't tucked away in the back or hidden in the shadows. They were sitting in the front row, on opposite sides of the aisle. On my left sat Daniel. He was leaning forward slightly, his eyes fixed on me, wet with tears he didn't try to hide. He was the man who had given me life. The man who had spent 18 years writing into a void. The man whose blood ran through my veins. On my right sat Owen. He was sitting tall, his hand resting on the empty seat beside him where my mother should have been. He was the man who had dried my tears, who had taught me to drive, who had built the daily structure of my world. I walked right between them. This wasn't a punishment for either of them. It wasn't a rejection of Owen's love or a dismissal of Daniel's sacrifice. It was an acknowledgement. I was walking through the center of my own complicated, broken history. One man had given me my start. The other had helped me grow. But as I moved toward Noah, I was affirming that neither of them owned me. My life was not a trophy to be passed from one hand to another. I reached the front of the aisle. I stopped for a moment, looking first at Daniel, then at Owen. I gave them both a small, solemn nod, a silent thank you for the truth, and a thank you for the presence. Then I stepped up to the altar and took Noah's hand. The ceremony continued, but the air in the room felt different. It was no longer a performance of a perfect family. It was a gathering of real people standing in the light of a very messy, very difficult truth. Behind me, in the very last row, I caught a glimpse of my mother. She had slipped in quietly, sitting in the shadows. She wasn't part of the celebration, but she was there, witnessing the moment her daughter finally stepped out from behind the wall of lies she had built. As I looked at Noah and began my vows, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing a role in someone else's script. I wasn't the abandoned daughter or the protected child. I was just Sophie, and I was finally home. The wedding flowers had long since wilted, and the guests had returned to their own lives, but for my family, the real work was only just beginning. Truth is a lot like raw timber. Once you split it open, you have to deal with the grain, the knots, and the moisture inside before you can ever hope to build something stable. In the months following the ceremony, the house I had lived in for years felt different. The silence wasn't heavy with mystery anymore, but it was still quiet. Sophie had made the difficult decision to step back from her mother. It wasn't an act of cruelty, but a necessary boundary for her own survival. Claire had finally entered therapy, a move that Owen had quietly but firmly insisted upon. I remember sitting with Claire in a small coffee shop about 3 months after the wedding. She looked tired, the sharp edges of her desperation softened by a reluctant honesty. "I used to tell myself I was doing it to protect her," she told me, her hands trembling as she held a porcelain cup. But my therapist helped me see that I was only protecting my own shadow. I was so afraid of being alone that I didn't care who I had to erase to keep her. She looked at me, and for the first time in 2 decades, she didn't look away. Daniel, I know now that no fear is big enough to make stealing a father from his child right. I stole 18 years of your life, and I stole 18 years of her safety. I can't fix that. I can only sit in the wreckage of it. I didn't offer her easy forgiveness. That isn't how things work when you've lost half a lifetime. But I did offer her a nod of acknowledgement. We were both older now, scarred by our own choices. I had to face my own mirror, too. I had to admit that I had been a coward, hiding behind the safety of my postage stamps because I was too afraid to walk onto her porch and face a possible no from my own daughter. Then there was the reading. Every Sunday afternoon, Sophie would come to my workshop. We didn't talk much at first. We had a ritual. We would sit on 2 stools near the workbench, the scent of cedar and oil hanging in the air, and we would open the walnut box. We decided to read the letters in chronological order, one by one, to bridge the gap that lay between us. We started with the letter from her 11th birthday. Dear Sophie, I saw a hawk today near the river and thought of how you used to point at the sky. Sophie cried through most of the first year of letters. She realized that while she was blowing out candles and wishing for a father who cared, I was sitting just a few miles away, writing down every detail of my days so she wouldn't be a stranger to my soul. I learned about the things she had never told her mother, the time she failed a math test and felt like a failure, the first boy who broke her heart, and the way she felt like a guest in Owen's house, even though he was nothing but kind to her. We were patching the holes in our history. Each letter was a stitch, a small piece of banva, the patch, that was slowly covering the wound. It was slow, painstaking work, much like restoring an antique piece of furniture that had been left out in the rain. You can't rush the drying process, or the wood will warp. By the time we reached the letters I had written when she was 20, the atmosphere in the shop had changed. We started to laugh. We talked about the music she liked and the way I still couldn't figure out how to use a smartphone properly. I wasn't just the man who sent the money or the ghost from the past anymore. I was Daniel. I was her father. Owen would sometimes drop her off or pick her up. He and I reached a silent understanding. He had been the one to hold the umbrella over her head during the storms I wasn't allowed to see, and I respected him for that. He didn't try to reclaim the space I was taking up, and I didn't try to diminish the nearly 2 decades of stability he had provided. We were 2 different kinds of fathers, and Sophie had enough room in her heart for both. One rainy Tuesday in November, I finished a project I had been working on in secret. It was a small, upright cabinet made of cherry wood. It wasn't large or ornate, but it was precise. It had 18 thin drawers, one for each year we had lost. I had spent weeks ensuring the glides were silent and the finish was as smooth as silk. When Sophie arrived that afternoon, I showed it to her. On the top, I had carved a small inscription in simple, clean letters, the place for conversations that arrived late. This is for the letters, I said, and for everything else we haven't said yet. Sophie ran her hand over the wood, her fingers lingering on the inscription. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she pulled a chair up to my workbench, took out a piece of paper, and began to write. I went back to my lathe, letting the hum of the machine fill the space. I didn't peek. I didn't ask. About 20 minutes later, she stood up and handed me the paper. She was sitting right across from me, her eyes bright and clear. I looked down at the page. Dear Dad, it began. This is the first letter I am giving you myself. I spent my whole life thinking the door was locked from your side. Now I realize the door was always there. It was just hidden under a layer of fear that wasn't ours to carry. Thank you for never stopping the writing. Thank you for waiting until I was strong enough to find the key. The truth didn't just break the silence, it opened a window. I can finally see the sun. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in the very first drawer of the cherry cabinet. We didn't need the stamps anymore. We didn't need the false bottoms or the secret compartments. We just needed the honesty to sit in the same room and exist together. The story of my family isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of a long, slow repair. But as I've learned in my workshop, a piece of wood that has been broken and glued back together is often stronger at the seam than it was before the break. This story reminds us that silence is rarely a shield. More often, it is a cage. We often hide the truth to protect those we love, forgetting that love cannot breathe in the dark. If there is someone you have been separated from by a wall of misunderstanding or fear, do not wait 18 years to find the crack in the foundation. Speak while the words can still be heard. Truth, even when it is painful, is the only material sturdy enough to build a future upon. Thank you for listening to this journey of the heart. If this story moved you or reminded you of the importance of honest conversation, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about the human spirit and the architecture of our lives. Your support helps us continue to tell the stories that matter.